Hi, this is Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. Delighted to have back someone who will be a regular on Mondays, Pablo Torre. Pablo, welcome.
Jen, you signed up for a terrible, terrible thing. I have so many takes for you today.
Oh my goodness. Well, let us start with something seemingly far afield of sports, religion, the Pope's death. We see so many athletes cross themselves or point to heaven. What does that really mean? Are these people genuinely religious? Is that kind of a tick that they do? Talk to us a little bit about players of various kinds and religion and faith.
Yeah. No, it's a phenomenally popular mode, of course, to enter post game is you thank God,
Yeah,
you thank your Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, you point to the sky, you kiss your fingers and then point. Maybe there are just so many variations we've seen throughout the years in every single
right.
sport, to the point where one of my favorite interviews I ever did actually was with a Buffalo Bills receiver named Stevie Johnson. And Stevie Johnson is otherwise an obscure character, but what he did was the thing that no one does, Jen. What he did was, after having this ball go through his hands, he actually blamed God. And he said, essentially, why have you forsaken me? And the quote is I want to do justice to it, so please, fact check me on the specific wording. But it was so eye-opening because it was somebody actually taking the logical extreme of God being responsible for everything to its natural conclusion, which is he's also responsible for when things are terrible. And so
Right.
for me, it was an exception that proved the rule. And Stevie Johnson, who had an incredible sense of humor about it, and it actually ended up being quietly, Jen, part of the reason why Bill's Mafia was born was
Yes.
because people rallied around Stevie Johnson and they
Yeah.
sort of like took him on as a recognition that he was legitimately in like emotional distress.
Right.
And Bill's Mafia, of course, being this fan base that is known for, I would say, a humanistic approach to charity, not
Yes.
unlike the Catholic Church at its
Right.
best, I dare say.
Right.
It sort of sprung from that weirdly, and that was just one of the more both strange but truly heartfelt conversation I've had was
Right.
that guy. But look, you go down the list, right? Like Harrison Butker, you may recall, the
Yeah.
Chiefs special teams ace. That guy got in trouble because he gave a speech at his at a commencement, I believe, or a class day at a Catholic college in which he talked about Catholicism. Now, in this version, the version that's not quite like Francis, right?
Yes.
So
Exactly.
Francis, I'm educated by the Jesuits, Jen. I am in awe of the legacy and the impact that Francis made because he was
Right.
somebody who legitimately believed in social justice, not as a buzzword, but
Yes.
as a tradition.
Yes.
This is what I learned from the Jesuits in high school, is that you
Right.
go and you frequent the prisons and the refugee camps and the war-torn nations. You wash the feet of Muslims and women
Yes.
and the lepers, right? This is Catholicism again at its best. And
Right.
so I say all of this to say that sports is this laboratory for the perversion of religion, as well as truly like a fairly common and mundane expression that doesn't quite get to the deeper level of, well,
Right.
what do you then believe as a matter of like religious principle, but is mostly as a way of saying, this is not just me, I'm part of something bigger. And that instinct, however cliche, is meaningful if you just take it at face value in that way.
Right. Now, there are similarities between religion and sports, obviously. It's sometimes a matter of faith. For all the money ball and all the analytics, a lot of this is faith. Part of it is the communal experience. You go there. And at least for football, more people probably go to football games or watch football games than go to church. I mean, is this kind of a civic religion for Americans who tend to be, although they go to church and they talk about religion, fairly secular in their ordinary life?
Oh, no question. It's also, by the way, on Sundays in the
Yes.
NFL, right? Football.
Yep. Yep.
This is the congregation, a
Yeah.
congregation of devotees who really do see this as hell if it doesn't go their way. I mean,
Yes.
not to continue to torture the metaphor, but it's real.
Yeah.
It's real that when you gather in the same space at that level of both emotional intensity and just sheer number of people,
Right.
it feels like you're at a religious revival.
Correct. It's
If
this transporting. You feel like out of body experience. Absolutely.
correct,
Absolutely.
correct.
So let's go from the holy to the money grubbing mundane. Portals. Whenever I hear that expression, as I was saying, I always think of transporters on Star Trek. You go in one end, everything gets scrambled around, and if it works properly, you come out the other end. Sometimes not. Sometimes you stay in there. Sometimes you're trapped. Portals. This is the means for those of you who are not sport devotees by which now college footballs shift around. It's a sort of free agency almost for college football. And they do it now, it seems, Pablo, not because they want to be close to home, not because they love the state of Colorado or the state of Michigan, but for the money, for the NIL money. And we've just had a phenomenal case in which the quarterback from Tennessee went into the portal, comes out the other end at UCLA, and there's a lot of buzz about how many millions of dollars. Talk to us a little bit and whether this kind of subverts the whole thing about college football, which is like loyalty to the club and the fan base, and you're a dying, Trojan, you're a dying Buckeye or whatever it is. Talk to us a little bit about the portal.
Y- Yeah, the evolution in college sports over the last 2 years has been unlike any other period in the
Yeah.
history of the NCAA. And on my show, Pablo Torre finds out on our Substack, pablo.show, you can go and subscribe. We chronicle this to a depth that has required a multi-part series, frankly,
Yeah.
because a couple of things are true. One thing is true about the transfer portal, which is that the transfer portal, as you put it, has something that coaches have accessed with not quite a sci-fi name for the entirety of the profession. They can basically get up and leave, get out of a contract when they want, assuming that there's been an arrangement worked out. So they have been effectively people with freedom of movement and salaries very significantly. And so what we're seeing with the era of paying athletes really for the first time on the books via name, image, and likeness payments, which for now, and I'll belabor this only to say that it's not quite a salary yet. In fact, legally, it is not. It is being paid for marketing dollars, which is a de facto salary for how good you are, which is why a quarterback like young Nico from Tennessee, now at UCLA, has been asking for more. It's because he's so good, not because he's such a great pitch man for anything. That's the only point I'm trying to make there. The era of paying these guys in that way has led to simultaneously this recognition that if you're not going to pay them salaries with contracts, what you're doing is just paying people without any legal ability to keep them for any length of time. And it's just that crazy. We're in a contractless era. And so free agency, Jen, is actually understating it because in the NFL and the NBA, you do have a contract, and when it expires, you're a free agent. In this case, you are perpetually a free agent, and coaches will
Right.
tell you that. I mean, so many. Nick Saban, for instance, if you're wondering why is it that I'm watching college football now and Nick Saban is in the broadcast booth, it's because he doesn't want to deal with this. It's
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
is a nightmare when it comes to trying to keep a roster together and planning years into the future, let alone months, as is often the case. And so the third thing about it that I think is important to discuss is that, yes, when it comes to what does this do to our understanding of what college sports even are, there are not insignificant unintended consequences, even if you believe that these guys should be paid and should have all of the freedom in the world. If you're on the side of the players being unjustly, withheld from the marketplace, which I believe, it's still also true that we are testing how much college, like the actual concept, is essential to why we like college sports. The difference,
Exactly.
Jen, between college sports and the minor leagues of anything is because
Yeah.
there's this plausible idea, however far-fetched, right? For those of us who have been following this closely, that these guys are like in class with you, that they're struggling over their physics problem set, or they're doing the reading for their American history intro seminar, or they're trying to just make sure that they get to the cafeteria with just enough time to squeeze in their class right after. And that's frankly never quite been true. But now you're pushing it to a level of just very bald implausibility. And so I do think we are running the risk of making all of this feel like a minor league. And I don't think that sport, a minor league anything,
Yeah,
basketball, football, whatever, is nearly as popular. Because
right.
as we talked about with the congregation on Saturdays, in college
Yeah,
football at least, that is a congregation that gathers because they are part of this tribe. And
right,
no minor league team in the history of sports has ever had that level of devotion.
right.
College sports is risking that right now as they have no idea how to make rules or navigate this legal system in the absence of something like a contract.
Um, Two questions for you. First of all, does this shift the balance of power on a team? A coach used to be king, godlike in college football. Now, if someone like Nico can up and go, do you now have more demanding players? Does the teaching discipline leadership role of a coach get diminished?
Oh, absolutely. I talked to a guy named Jake Rosenberg, and Jake was a VP with the Philadelphia Eagles, and his job now is helping build these modern front offices for these teams like Oklahoma and Florida, these top level football programs. And what Jake told me in the episode we did with him is that the job of coach, of college head coach, is radically changing. Because in an era in which you're dealing with a marketplace, in which recruiting is not merely winning over via retail politics, the
Yes.
parents in the living room, but like handing out a check. Well, that's now quite like the pros, right? So you have somebody who's going to sign these players to these deals, and that's the GM. And then you're going to have a coach whose job is fundamentally to be X's and O's. And so
Yeah.
there are lots of coaches who are retail politicians, first and foremost, who are finding that their skill set is just remarkably less valuable in the
Right.
coming years. And
Right.
that has been a really tough adjustment because look, I always think of, it was Matthew McConaughey as Wooderson, and I believe Dazed and Confused. The thing he likes about college, I'll paraphrase it for this conversation. He gets older, they stay the same age.
Right.
Right?
Right.
College coaches are the ones who stick around as the revolving door of athletes go through. Now the revolving door is spinning at a speed that they
That's
cannot
exactly.
control, and they do not enjoy it. That's why Saban's
Yeah.
gone. That's why all of these guys are contemplating the
Fascinating.
time to leave.
Fascinating. Does it also empower these alumni groups, which are the ones who often work out the marketing deals? It's not like the college kid goes out to cornflakes and goes out to State Farm. They have these enormous alumni groups who gather this money, who help them negotiate. Does that empower these alumni people even more so than they used to be?
Absolutely. I mean, we're in the era of, they call them collectives. We did an episode about collectives, NIL collectives, but really they're super PACs.
Yeah.
We can use the language of politics here. It's like, it's not us. It's not us, but it's also kind of us. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
what this is. And so who do you trust to run your super PAC? You trust these boosters who have been
Right.
always around, but just in the shadows. And now
Right.
they're the ones making the calls on the record. And
Yeah.
that's absolutely a power dynamic that's fundamentally around where are we getting our money from? Because now the
Right.
game is so much, even more than before, it is just so much about money.
Right. Right. Now, I guess I'll close on this issue on what I thought was the most absurd example. And that was someone from the Army football team going into the portal. Wait a second. I thought he was serving his country. I thought he took an oath. What the heck?
Oh, this is also one of the great contradictions, right? How are you a minor league sports franchise, but also the United States Armed Services? Like
Right.
it's truly like the military academies. And again, Army Navy is a phenomenal rivalry, right?
Yes.
Phenomenal, phenomenal. But something that happens when you get prospects who have this marketplace is that you
Yes,
dare them to truly renege on what I would assume, and I haven't studied this story specifically, but what I
yes,
assume is something that's even more profound than what would be a contract, but it's some commitment to
right,
defend your country. Like it's
right.
just it's
I,
that is
I am,
a loaded series of metaphors that are tough to
yes.
disentangle.
And I have no idea on the specifics. Maybe he has to repay the military, maybe he has to go back into the military, but just the concept that you would give up even that allegiance to go into the
Oh,
portal.
well, but now I'm realizing as I'm refreshing my memory on this story, yeah, this kid's going to Georgia, which
Right.
is to say, like the best school. And so, on the level of like, do I blame him? Of course, as a football matter, of course not. But I also certainly wouldn't want to be the one telling my commanding officer, "Hey, coach, I'm entering the portal." That's not
And
exactly the
and it's not
safe
like
thing.
the army can have a collective to compete with Georgia.
Well,
It's
the Department of Defense, who knows what they're spending money on these
who
days?
knows,
Who
you know?
knows?
Maybe we found a job for Pete Hegseth that he can actually
You
do.
would be so much more qualified to run
Oh,
the
absolutely.
collectives for the US Army than he would
And he
be
could
running
drink
the
in the open.
actual US Army.
He could drink all the time. It's
Tailgate.
perfect.
It's a safe space for you to do the thing you really love to do, Pete Hegseth, which is tailgate.
Exactly. Exactly. So, final topic for today. I want to talk about sustained disappointment, crushing burden. In back-to-back weeks, we've had two phenomenally popular golfers. First, Rory McIlroy, who has been waiting for over a decade to win the Masters and was stuck at the number of majors he had won. Finally won at the Masters and completely broke down in, I think, the greatest show of emotion I've ever seen from him. Then the next week at the RBC, you have Justin Thomas, who hasn't won for over 2 years. And he finally wins in a playoff, by the way. And both of them were actually in playoffs.
Yes.
About what that kind of pressure is for a golfer playing this absolutely maddening game and you don't win or you don't win at a level for years. What was that like for these guys? And do you think this kind of reopens their career because they no longer have this cloud hanging over them?
There is no crucible for psychological pressure like golf. It
Yeah,
is the thing that certainly actual like scientists and psychologists have studied when it comes to choking, when it comes to the yips, when it comes to any sort of euphemism you have for what it means to choke, for what it means to break under pressure. And so for these two guys, by the way, who are on paper, like before they won these
right.
last two playoff victories, so to speak, they were clearly excellent, but they were dogged by a very fair critique. In Rory's case, just to use him as the example, it had been 11 years since he won a major. And so we had seen him choke. And when you see that happen over and over again, you can't help but feel like you're writing, even if you're like an empathetic person, you can't help but feel like you're writing like a headline on the back page of the New York Post. It's like this guy doesn't have it, right? Like this guy, like what a disaster. And so for him to overcome that at Augusta, while almost not overcoming it,
Yes, he had his own little yip. He had his own little
yes,
choke at the end. He could have won
yes,
it in regulation.
correct. It went to the playoff because he choked. And so this fundamental question of what is Rory McIlroy now? How do we see him
Yeah.
differently? It's fascinating because again, a couple of things are true. One is Rory's, of course, one of the all-time greats. He's so excellent, generational, all of that's true. But at the same time, we've seen him. The way I want to put this is particular because I am somebody who cares deeply about process. And I think about process all of the time when it comes to, by the way, the rule of law in politics, right? How are we doing this is more, it's more useful an exercise than just saying, we want the end result to be this, so we'll get there however we get there. It's like, no, actually, you should be more rigorously appreciative of the system and the how as opposed to the end state. And
Yeah.
so the process in Rory's case is tricky
Now,
because we he didn't exactly exercise all of the demons because the
right,
how
right.
of how he won was also this wooden roller coaster of a ride where you're like, I think we're gonna fall off this thing, but you survive.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like it's very scary, but the end result is the end result. And sports, Jen, to not further get highfalutin about this point, sports is the number one business where only the result matters.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Process is so unsympathetic to any sports fan, and I get why,
Right.
right? It's about
Yeah.
it's about did you get the trophy? Did you win?
But right.
There moral victories are not a thing.
Yes, in sports. Exactly.
And so Rory, I salute him for getting the only thing that can free him from the back page of the newspaper,
Right.
even
Exactly.
if in the process he made me think, I don't know. He's
Right.
still kind of doing it. He's still kind of
Right.
doing it at the same time.
Now, one fascinating aspect of the Justin Thomas win was that golf is what they call a self-regulating sport, a self-policing force. And he called a penalty on himself, which
Mm.
resulted in a one-shot penalty. He moved the ball, however, slightly, as I understand it, in a bunker when he shouldn't have. And he said, my bad. And he took a one penalty shot. If not for that, he arguably would have won much easier in regulation. And it might have changed the other players' plays as well. Can you imagine that happening in most any other sport? Oh, my bad. And I could lose, a tournament and $3 million.
One of my favorite episodes we did of my show is about this commercial that you may or may not have seen because it aired a zillion times during March Madness. And it's
Yeah.
one of these ads where the player in the ad says, "It was off me, coach." And they hand the ball to the other team, literally in the scenario you just
Yes.
abstractly
That actually
described.
happened. Right.
Well, and so in this commercial, it happens. And that commercial is arguably the biggest laughing stock of an ad in the history of sports. It became a meme. That player who is an actor, like it's just we had to go track him down from effectively de facto witness protection
Oh,
because he was made fun of
mocked.
for being this
Yeah.
kid. His name was Alex in the ad, but he was mocked because no real athlete, the feedback went, would ever do that, would ever go to the ref and say, actually, the other team should have the ball at the end of the game. That's my fault. And so, again, the ways in which golf is an extreme and is extreme sport in its own way is this thing about a code of honor, is this
Yeah.
thing about self-policing, and it is this thing that makes it all the more ridiculous that our current president is the most
Yes.
notorious cheater at this
Cheater.
event where the greatest in the
Exactly.
world will say, hand up, it was off me, coach. Like they actually do that there. And the fact that he comports himself the way he does, I just need people to understand how triply insulting that is, that he would do
Okay.
that in that game.
Well, think about this comparison. We have Pope Francis, Donald Trump, Justin Thomas, Donald Trump. There is no comparison that shows him in a more favorable light, I would suggest, than those two. But I will say this, just as there is nothing, I'm sure, more maddening for golf, can you imagine the families that have to live with this, that are watching this? When we saw Justin Thomas and his wife with the baby and his
Yeah.
father, it means like you must die 1,000 deaths. And of course, if the guy screws up, you'll have to console and be there. So maybe it was a win for the family as well.
No, but part of the reason I love sports is because genuinely, and this is going to sound cruel, like I'm in the Coliseum, but humiliation is actually on the line.
Yeah,
The stakes
exactly.
are profound.
Yeah.
Um, we're in a world of artifice these days in which we can never tell, is this person a bot? Is that guy just scamming? Is this person really authentic about how they feel? And in sports, when you watch that video of Rory McIlroy, for instance, break down what you referenced, the reason that we cry watching it is because we're seeing a sincere expression of human
Yes.
emotion in an unguarded and candid way. And because we know what it took, because we know the 11 years that built up to it, because we know what would lie in wait for him if he had, in fact, choked again at the very end, then we would also know how much of a nightmare his life would be. And so we're
Right.
watching somebody escape a fate that is cruel. And it's
Absolutely.
also at a moment, I think, also when it's nice to have, again, a little laboratory, a little experiment in sports where cruelty can be appreciated without actually venturing towards the cruelty being visited upon defenseless human beings everywhere else in our country. It's a remarkable thing that sports lets us talk in this way, but while also knowing that, okay, also, it is fundamentally a game.
Could not put it any better. And that's why we love sports. It has everything. It has faith, it has disaster, it
Yes.
has perseverance, it has money grubbing, it has power politics. It is like the Torah and like the Godfather, a story for everyone. So on that note, thank you, Pablo. I can't wait to have you back next week. And until then, thank you, contrarians. Enjoy your sports. Bye-bye.